Hi, I'm Malibu, Barron. I'll be presenting on this webinar on becoming trauma responsive when working with families and children. Before I proceed with this webinar, I'd like to give you a heads up that some material discussed in this webinar can be triggering. It could be words, certain situations that cause flashbacks. While viewing this webinar, it could trigger your own trauma or those closest to you, their trauma, related with violence, abuse, alcoholism, language deprivation, child trauma. Now understand there will not be any specific details discussed in this webinar. If you decide to continue viewing this webinar, please know that you are allowed and encouraged to pause before going through each slide. And take your time. This right here is what we'll be covering and discussing today. T-R-A-U-M-A, trauma. When the word trauma appeared on the screen, go ahead and make notes of your initial thoughts, feelings, and assumption of that word trauma. Now, without judgment or trying to explain, take a few minutes and note questions like, what words or images came to mind in viewing that word? How do you feel about trauma? What are your assumptions of trauma? If someone came to mind, what about those people? That is your initial reaction to trauma, again, in your conscious mind. And that's a bias you have towards trauma, which is reinforced by your everyday experiences and observations in your life. And now it can become harmful if we keep it unconscious and do not unpack. That impacts how we interact with those who have experienced trauma. Now, trauma can be categorized in different ways. For this webinar, we will focus on 4 categories that are easy to remember: acute, chronic, intergenerational, and complex. And I'll expand on these. Acute is more about a one-time instance, such as a car accident, a natural disaster, and it's easier to recover from. Chronic is something that has happened ongoing, again and again, more than twice. Domestic violence, language deprivation, alcoholism, abuse, things that will continue to happen for years and years. Intergenerational is when they've experienced concentration camps or enslavement, something that is rooted in the family DNA. Complex is a mixture of the 3. Many people, unfortunately, Black and brown families, have intergenerational and a mix of all of the 3. So trauma is like a smoke detector in our body. So if there's smoke or fire, it gives us that warning. Now in our brain, we have the amygdala. If triggered, it sends out cortisol. Now imagine if a bear was in the room and you were not expecting that. Of course, you'd have the response of either fight, flight, or freeze. And that's a one-time experience. You'd feel safe after they left. But later on, it could just be something with brown fur. And you would respond again with fight, flight, or freeze. Maybe the next time it's 10 bears. But then you become used to what it is they look like and how it appears. But inside, there's so much cortisol that is continuously released. And that can definitely impact you. Trauma is not something that just happens once and then you move on. It is impactful into our mind, our brain, our bodies. It requires time, relationships, a sense of safety, and really allowing time to have your brain rewire itself to heal from that experience of trauma. Trauma in children and families. If trauma has actually happened going forward, what does it look like? Some examples can be different. There's no right or wrong way to react to trauma. It can be a fight response, a flight response, or a freeze response. Being reactive is clear. There's a struggle. Now it could be a fight, an argument, leaving, so that would be flight if a problem arises. Numbness would be more about that freeze response. Resiliency really is dependent upon a healthy support system, grit, being able to cope with different things, so having good coping strategies. Trauma in children is often intertwined with families. It's very complex and not easy. Many children who have high ACE scores have high resiliency. So later in their adult life, they may struggle. They may struggle with alcoholism, early pregnancy, abusive relationship, being absent from work, job hopping. If you'd like to learn more about the ACEs score and that study, which is very reliable, that will be included in this webinar. We've been in this pandemic for over a year, and it has impacted many of us in relation to race, class, access to resources. People are really struggling with trauma, such as life changes like this pandemic. So it's everywhere. There's no right or wrong way that we approach this. It's just through our life experiences. But what's important is that you get the support that you need. Trauma is intersectional. It is deeply rooted in marginalized communities that have experienced enslavement, concentration camps, family separation, language deprivation, trafficking, police brutality. We can't have a conversation about trauma without adding the issues of racism, classism, autism, sexism, heterosexualism, vidism, ableism, and a number more. Because the community has really been rooted in trauma in their experience, whether it be acute, chronic, or complex, or intergenerational. Trauma looks different for each person. Some children or families, colleagues, look like they have everything put together, but inside they're truly struggling with trauma. Some individuals may show it more evidently externally, whether they're losing weight, gaining weight, their hygiene, the way their eyes are, their restlessness. Obviously, they're struggling. But some of them internally are truly struggling without anyone knowing. Trauma is a spectrum of struggles and triumphs, whether they be external, internal, withdrawn, assertive. We cannot put everything into one box and label that trauma. It's a range of trauma. There are different ways of understanding trauma, but there are 5 fundamental truths of trauma. Trauma is real. Trauma is prevalent. Trauma is toxic to the brain and can affect development and learning in a multitude of ways. In our schools, we need to prepare our students that give them the support if they've experienced trauma. Whether we know the details or not, we need to be prepared. And children are resilient. With a positive learning environment, they can develop, grow, and be successful. Our initial reaction to trauma, with the best of intentions, service providers, we want to make sure that we give top-notch service for each child and family. What I typically do is I try to seek details on how to make sure that I'm not triggering them in our office or classroom. I like to make sure that I protect that child and that family. If they seem to be struggling, then I decrease some expectations so that they're able to accomplish that. Assuming that the family is not involved, or maybe they have too much on their plate. Make recommendations when a child seems restless or inattentive, or maybe quiet, not talking. So making recommendations for evaluators that may need to to be having more evaluations for their child with the best of intentions. Then after a few months, after time goes on, maybe they're not making progress. We start to feel worried. Are they going to succeed? Now let's shift to being more responsive to trauma. With making conscious decisions and intent as a provider, providing best services to try to create a trauma responsive learning environment for all, regardless of lack of details, we still want to create that environment to become more responsive to their needs, increasing efforts to build a relationship with that child and family. Assuming that the family may be struggling and they need to be informed of what the school or offices can do with them, not for them. Families may have a negative experience with the school office and don't trust. So we need to work to build that relationship with that family and the children. Then during the meetings, maybe I haven't asked questions and I assume they know. That's when I should go ahead and ask, what services has the student already had? How many minutes have they been taken out of class? What possible systematic changes can we do that would benefit for all students who have trauma? For example, sensory experiences in the classroom. And there's a multitude of ways to create a more responsive classroom and responsive services for the student or family who has experienced that trauma. It's fascinating how trauma can easily enter our lives uninvited. As a service provider, I experienced secondary traumatic stress symptoms, which means a person may not have witnessed that trauma, but working closely with that child or family who has experienced the trauma has now affected our lives. The violence and trauma, if we don't talk about it or don't recognize the symptoms, that increases and causes anxiety, depression, and other mental health illnesses. You have to set healthy and clear boundaries at home and work. Make sure you have self-care. And I'll explain a little bit more in this webinar, but I encourage you to notice those symptoms of STSS. Develop and maintain a support system at home, at work, with professional support. Now at home, you could do that with your partner, your children, family, neighbor. Take the time to do the things that you love most. What makes you feel that joy, makes you feel safe. At work, make sure you communicate with your supervisors or colleagues about when you're feeling like you're struggling with a student, or maybe connected to their experiences, and making sure you give support to yourself at home. Get support with professionals such as a therapist or a group. If I start to notice that, say my anxiety is rising because about a bus or an accident or abuse, take the opportunity to see a therapist or a support group to start to unpack and talk about that. If we don't, symptoms will increase. Make sure we manage our own healing. Even though it may not be our fault or someone else's fault, we are responsible for our own healing, taking care of ourselves so that we can take care of their family and friends who have experienced trauma, to make sure it doesn't overspill in our work or our home life. The current system for our children and their families exists in either a system that is trauma-induced, meaning reactive and unsafe, or trauma indifference, unreactive or hopeless. The 3 pages here are based on the Sowers and Hall's book, describing the spectrum of trauma-induced to trauma-invested, and what that looks like in the classroom or office. Take a moment to pause and look at these 3 pages. I encourage you to buy this book to learn more about the practices that have long-term impact on children with trauma. You can see what your classroom or office would look like and how you can change that. Now I've gone in depth about ourselves. Now a systematic approach on trauma. Trauma is big. So there are some systematic approaches that you can do. Because we can't help a child and family if they're in a system where most of it is using reactive or punitive or a way to meet their needs is from fixing the hurt. To approach trauma, we have to really work together, collaborate, and recognize the need to change our system. Now, it could be a school, agency, or organization. Here's a list that you can take a look at for changes in your system. Leadership needs to be stable and reliable, even in a crisis. Communication is clear and ongoing. The environment itself is physically safe. A system that is proactive and responsive to make sure it's ready to respond to the staff's needs to reduce and prevent STSS symptoms. When discussing trauma, make sure everybody's speaking the same language. View the behavior as communication of unmet needs. PD, PLCs really need to collaborate, share updates and information about trauma work while doing anti-racism work, anti-bias, and cultural competency work. To become a trauma-responsive provider requires you to welcome trauma into your work, understanding without judgment, and having a conscious mindset. You need you to be able to become comfortable with uncomfortableness. Trauma is complicated, requires patience, time, relationships. To reach a culture of safety, it starts with your office. You'll notice in this PowerPoint, there's Maslow's hierarchy of need. Now we need to consider that. Where are our children and family? If we want them to be safe, we need to recognize, have their basic needs been met? If they have, then create a culture of safety in our office so that our families and children can really thrive in a healthy safety learning environment. Providing trauma-responsive care, you really have to transform the setting to provide a support of cultural safety. Starting from the waiting room, your office, there's different ways you communicate to your students, family, and children. So for example, if you're working with a child and their family and they've recently experienced sexual violence, maybe I have provided clear steps as to what's going to happen before, during, and after the session a week before, and then do check-ins. Then I'll meet them in the waiting room, chat and introduce myself, guiding them to the office to sit either on the chair or the floor, anywhere they feel comfortable. Maybe if they don't feel comfortable in that room, I give them an option of another room to give them that sense of empowerment, to know that they are in control of their healing and allowing the family to guide the process with me. Now understand this is without judgment, it's with validation, with empathy, accessibility, and flexibility to feel that sense of empowerment. Those with trauma really feel like they have no empowerment, they have no control over their life, or they're suffering. That sense of empowerment gives them that feeling that they can start and then start the healing process. Trauma-responsive care first starts with our mindset. Now we have a fixed mindset that people won't change. Now we need to change that to a growth mindset that people can change no matter where they're at. They will grow and change. Deficit thinking needs to change to positive thinking and noticing the strengths and skills they already have and build upon that. Now behavior is actually a way to communicate with us what their needs are that have not been met. Maybe it's affection, maybe it's positive praise, maybe it's access to different things. They're communicating with us. Be clear and simple with your communication before and during, and expect that you will repeat, and be patient. Be patient with a person's trauma. It may take weeks before they can make eye contact. Just giving that eye gaze to say hello, that in itself is a big accomplishment. Provide options. Limit it to 1 or 2 or 3 about what they can do to make sure they have that sense of empowerment. Be flexible with the family and children. They need time for their brain to be rewired. Their whole body or self has been impacted by trauma, so they need the people around them to give them the support. To start healing, Those with trauma need someone like you to hold a space and help them heal from their trauma. One of my favorite quotes, "We live in a world that is full of problems, and we are the solution to those problems." And that's my favorite quote by Julia Butterfly Hill. These are 3 books on this PowerPoint that I recommend you read if you'd like to learn more about trauma, how you can shift your classroom or office to be more trauma responsive. I highly recommend these 3 books to learn more about that. These are 2 self-care activities. There's a SelfCare Assessment and STSS Assessment. You can assess where you're at, what areas you may need some increased support to make sure you're feeling well. If not, you can see what the next steps are to make sure that you care for yourself. This is my reference page, and this is all of the references that I've used throughout the webinar. Thank you for viewing, and please don't forget to have self-care. Thank you.